You matter. You matter. You matter. Till the day that you die, you will matter. And I hope you can see that you're worth being free, 'cause you matter.
My name is Charissa Schalk. Thank you for joining me as we look at the need for approval from a biblical perspective and through the lens of my leveraged relationship model. Oh, how badly we need approval. Sometimes we manipulate the people we're in relationship with, hoping they'll give us approval. At other times, we allow ourselves to be manipulated, becoming slaves to others or to popular opinion in a futile attempt to buy the approval we seek. We can't solve this manipulation and slavery issue by pretending we don't need approval. Even Jesus needed it, and God met that need by telling Jesus before witnesses that this is my beloved Son who has my complete approval. If Jesus needed approval, it's safe to say we all need approval. We need approval, but we can't actually utilize approval from just any source. Notice that Jesus received his approval from his Father, and having received it from his Father, he was indifferent to disapproval from his peers or from those to whom he ministered. This is where the principles of leveraged relationship come in. You can find other videos on my channel diving into more details on leveraged relationship, and there are more to come. But for now, let's take just a peek. The basic concept of leveraging in relationship is that every productive, living relationship is asymmetrical or leveraged with a power side and a vulnerable side. Sometimes there are multiple relationships between the same two parties with asymmetry leaning in different directions, but in any one relationship, there is but one power position and one vulnerable position. A simple practical example of this is a parent with a toddler. The toddler is never, ever in the power position in the relationship, and the parent is never in the vulnerable position in that relationship. 20 or 30 years down the line, other relationships between these two parties may develop as the toddler develops expertise in some field, but in the present, there is but one relationship that exists between parent and toddler, and the parent is in the power position. When Jesus received approval he could truly utilize, he received it from his Father. Jesus, in the vulnerable position in the relationship, received approval from his Father, who was in the power position. Useful, powerful, liberating approval can be obtained from no other source. A parent may want approval from their toddler, but if a toddler's approval becomes the guiding light in that relationship, the parent will slide fully into the bad parent category, becoming a slave to the child's every whim and desire. If any one of us requires the approval of every person we're ever exposed to, we too will become slaves to the whims and desires of people. We need approval. You need approval, and I need approval. In a healthy childhood, we would have received this approval from our parents. Love, connection, and presence would have been provided to us even when we misbehaved. We wouldn't have had to perform perfectly to be loved, and discipline wouldn't have come in the form of parental withdrawal. In the absence of such parental approval when we were young and extremely vulnerable, it can become increasingly difficult to internalize approval as we get older. Especially when we're in challenging circumstances, it can be easy to lose sight of God's approval. Pretend for just a moment that it's you standing by the Jordan instead of Jesus. Can you imagine the heavens opening and a voice saying, "This is my beloved child who has my complete approval"? Do you believe that God approves of you? Do you feel his approval? If you don't, let's just take a swipe at any condemnation about that. When we're in a state of crisis, it can be flat out impossible to believe that we have God's approval. We can say, along with Gideon, If God is with me, why are all these horrible things happening? If God approves of me, why is my world falling apart? Why am I falling apart? It's rather unlikely that any one of us will ever hear a voice from heaven, as Jesus did, but we do need to recognize that God's approval is what we're actually seeking. Only His approval can liberate us from seeking the approval of our peers or of those to whom we minister. We experience God's stamp of approval on our maturity in the form of power, the capacity to effectively fill a position of power in our world. But even before we have received power, even when we're immature in some or all areas of our lives, we receive God's approval by faith. We experience this as self-approval, as I approve of myself, even when we haven't performed up to standards. God gives us His Spirit so we can know His thoughts, particularly His thoughts about us. It's in those moments when we know He approves of us that we can stand up, dust off our failures, and try again. When God's approval translates into self-approval, the disapproval of those around us can't drive us off course. If you believe that God's opinion matters most, if you love Him above all else, you may forget that His opinion is the only one that counts, just as I forget. But when you remember, it changes everything. This is Charissa Schalk, and until we meet again, take good care of yourself, because God approves of you.